Hello, welcome to the Comic Book Commentary. I'm Bo Leidig, and this week we're going to be talking about the original Gen 13 miniseries once again with Gen 13 number 4. So let's zoom in and take a closer look. First published in May of 1994, we can see here on the cover the team is working together to fight off a bunch of bad guys. It's actually a pretty cool little battle sequence. Great artwork by J. Scott Campbell with some of the team members pictured here all along the bottom. Everything looks really cool on the front, although, again, I would have preferred a background. Everybody who's been watching for a while knows that I'm not a huge fan of missing backgrounds, and this book is kind of 50-50 on that, as you'll see once we get inside. Co-creators, Jim Lee, Brandon Choi. Story, Jim Lee, J. Scott Campbell, and Brandon Choi. J. Scott Campbell, pencils. Alex Garner, inks. Richard Starkings with Comicraft, letters. Wendy Fouts, colors. Wildstorm Effects, color separations. Sandra Hope, ink assist. Wildstorm Effects, production. Jeff Mariotti, letters, page editor. Sarah Becker, assistant editor. Bill Kaplan, editor-in-chief. Cover by J. Scott Campbell and Alex Garner. And that was a mouthful. Holy crap, that's a lot of people making one comic book. Kind of crazy when you compare it to like Todd McFarlane, who was doing it with like as few as 5 people at some points. But whatever, man, that's the way they were doing things under Wildstorm Productions and Homage Studios. We see here on the first page a close-up of Fairchild as she's trying to figure out what her next move should be, as she's essentially staring death in the face, marking that she was told her whole life that your entire life flashes before your eyes when you're about to die, but for some reason she can only picture what happened in the last month, and it gives a full rundown essentially of the story thus far going around the perimeter, which brings up a great time to remind all of you that if you haven't seen my videos on the first 3 episodes of this miniseries, I suggest you watch those before watching this episode, because otherwise you're going to be kind of lost. You can find them all in my Gen 13 playlist. However, I do want to point out that if you do that, you will notice that I, unfortunately, mistakenly started the series with Gen 13 number 0, which is supposed to come after the miniseries. But thanks to the ridiculous way in which they numbered these things and released them originally, I got confused and made that the first video. So skip over that, watch my episodes on issues number 1, 2, and 3, and then you can watch this one, and then you're all caught up. Simple, right? And the reason that Fairchild is so worried about dying is because she is exactly where we left off in the previous issue, where she and Pitt are surrounded by a number of soldiers staring down the barrels of a bunch of laser rifles, as the facility director, Ivana, basically orders Lynch to give the order for all of the soldiers to open fire and kill both Fairchild and Pitt. Lynch, however, decides that this is not the course of action he wants to take, and this brings up an interesting power dynamic, because while Ivana is in charge of the facility, Lynch technically still outranks her and is the one in charge of the Black Razor assault team that brought Pitt to the facility in the first place. Meanwhile, while this argument is happening between Lynch and Ivana, as Lynch states he's going to take the 2 of them with him when he leaves the facility in the morning, Pitt and Fairchild are having their own conversation, as Pitt formally introduces himself and also states that the other within him is the chakran child known as Jerub. Now, this is important to remember. This happens before Jerub separates himself from Pitt's consciousness and instead enters Timmy's body in the ongoing Pitt series. If you want to learn more about that, you can find those episodes in my Pitt playlist. As the argument heats up, Ivana decides that she's none too happy with the fact that Lynch is challenging her authority, and states that she's not going to allow him to take the 2 of them with him in the morning, that she wants them both dead while they're both here in front of them. As this argument continues, Fairchild realizes that they're all basically distracted by it, and that this is the exact time that she and Pitt should be formulating a plan to basically get themselves out of this situation. Pitt actually mocks her a little bit for, coming up with this plan, stating like, oh, all by yourself you figured that out. However, Jareb reminds Pitt that, at this point, Fairchild's only like 18, 19 years old, and that he needs to have a little bit more patience with her. As the argument heats up, Lynch again tries to tell Ivana, like, no, I'm going to handle this my way, but Ivana decides that she's heard enough and actually orders the Black Razor assault team to open fire and kill both Fairchild and Pitt. However, the Black Razor assault team do not answer to Ivana at all, especially when Lynch is around, and they state that they can't do that. So Ivana decides to take matters into her own hands as she grabs the gun from one of her soldiers and opens fire on the two Black Razor assault members, killing them both. And at this point, Lynch realizes that he's lost full control of the situation and things are quickly spiraling out of control. Upon seeing this, Fairchild realizes that she has to act fast and decides to make her move. She then leg sweeps both of Ivana's soldiers and Ivana, which is rather easy given that she's now around 7 feet tall, at least when J. Scott Campbell decides to draw her that height. Very often he's not consistent about how tall he draws her, even though she's supposed to be taller than everyone else in this comic book outside of Pitt. Pitt commends her on her action and states that she actually has the wisdom of a true warrior. Ivana falls and decides that she needs to gain the upper hand, but Fairchild, believing that she and Pitt are now the ones who have the advantage, states that they're going to take Ivana down and escape the facility. However, Ivana has more tricks up her sleeves as she immediately contacts reinforcements, which is her heavy weapons assault team that barges in the door of the room that they're in with guns at the ready, and Caitlin and Pitt are now vastly outnumbered. Meanwhile, several floors up, the rest of the team, after escaping Threshold's lab, are inspecting the hole that was made by both Caitlin and Pitt as they fell through the floor. They're trying to figure out what their next move should be and figuring out exactly what's going on. They quickly realize that Caitlin had to do with this, as she's, as far as these three are concerned, the only person who was strong enough to make such a hole. Of course, they don't know that Pitt is in the facility yet. And Grunge at this point starts to not get Sarah Rainmaker's name right at all. He calls her Painstaker, and she corrects him and is somewhat irritated by this. During all this, however, we see that Roxy has been conversing with Timmy, and she gives everybody the info explaining that Pitt is here and trying to rescue Timmy, who was basically brought to the facility under the same guise as the rest of the gang. And then they hear gunfiring erupt from below, and they realize that Caitlin and Pitt must be down and facing a bunch of the soldiers who are imprisoning all of them, and that they've got to do something to help. So at this point, Burnout takes the lead and states that he's got an idea up his sleeve, and once again, we see Sarah getting rather irritated by Grunge mispronouncing her name for the second time. Also, I'd like to point out that you'll notice really only like one of these panels has a fully fleshed out background, and this one has a sort of fleshed out background, and the rest of them are just, colors. I would be more upset about this if it was happening constantly and most of the panels had just colors for backgrounds, but as I stated before, it's only about half of them, which I still don't like, but I guess that's better than a lot of other books were doing at this time, but still, I want to see backgrounds, not just colors. We then get an advertisement for the 1994 New York Comic-Con, which in 1994 was only a 2-day event. Hard to believe 30 years later that one of the big major conventions of the year was only 2 days, but here we see it 30 years later, that's what it was. It involved, in person, Jim Lee, J. Scott Campbell, Brett Booth, and Bill Kaplan. If you were at the event and happened to meet any of these guys, feel free to tell me about it in the comments section below, because I'd love to hear about it. Getting back to the story, we see that Burnout creates a plasma blast inside of his hands with the idea that he's going to launch an attack from the upper floors. Sarah decides to use her air manipulation powers to focus the blast into a concentrated fireball and then launch it down through the holes in the multiple floor levels into the action. And when it hits, it actually causes a massive explosion that takes out a lot of the guards of the facility. And I feel like this was kind of a reckless attack, given that they had no way of knowing if Fairchild and Pitt could survive such a violent blast, but they were just like, yep, we're going to do our best from up here. Also, once again, we see Grunge mistakenly call Sarah another wrong name. And at this point, she's actually starting to lose her temper and decides to hurl her own insult, calling him, which this is ridiculous, a reality-impaired Barney, which I'm guessing is in reference to Barney the dinosaur, which would have been topical in 94, but it's just hilarious that that was the best insult that she could have come up with off the top of her head. We then come across my other least favorite thing to see in these old books, which is a 2-page vertical splash, because it makes it so much of a headache to try and film. But as we get back into the story, we see that the team then decides to jump into the action as they all leap into the hole. And of course, Burnout can fly, but Roxy uses her powers of telekinesis to safely lower the other 3 into the battle. Once again, we see Grunge misnaming Sarah, calling her Drain Maker. At this point, Sarah has had enough and says, you know what? Just call me Sarah. It's fine. And Grunge, once again, messes up her name, instead calling her Farah, to which she just swears, which in this book is just represented by squiggles. Now, this, of course, is to illustrate not that Grunge is trying to be insulting. He's just that dumb. He's not a bright man. He's doing his best. He's a nice guy, but he's not brilliant. As they enter the battle, Fairchild is shocked to see her friends not only not in danger, but suddenly right behind her. This, of course, is completely in contrast to the psychic link alert that she got from Roxy that she doesn't understand, and I'm not certain Roxy does at this point either. Fairchild asks how they were able to free themselves, and Burnout explains that it was because Grunge manifested his powers and freed all of them. This shocks Caitlin, as she can't believe that Grunge now has powers. And Grunge says, yeah, believe it, I'm the man with the plan, and we're here to save the day. And Sarah's like, oh, so you're the one who formulated this plan now. However, before the reunion can be fully realized, Burnout quickly reminds Caitlin that they're in the midst of a battle and that they need to remain focused on fighting the enemy as he and Sarah start to attack the enemy soldiers. This, of course, is all grabbing the attention of Pitt, who asks if these are more soldiers sent to come after them, but Caitlin quickly interjects and states, no, these are my friends, they've come to help. Pitt states that he doesn't need any help, which is pretty apparent given the fact that he's Pitt and he's currently in the midst of kicking ass and taking names. But Jareb quickly reminds him that these people are their allies and that they need to be treated with respect. Pitt reluctantly agrees, but then also states to Jareb, if the reinforcements who are coming to save us are children, then we're in deep trouble. However, Pitt might be underselling exactly how powerful these new allies are, as we see Roxy face off against 2 of the heavy soldiers without even the slightest inkling of fear. She immediately lures them in and then uses her powers to grab both of the soldiers, launch them into the air, and smash their heads together, taking both of them out in a single maneuver. After being amped up watching his girlfriend take out enemy soldiers with her powers, Grunge decides that he's now going to enter the fight, and he's so confident in his martial arts abilities that he's not even going to use his powers and take out the soldiers using just his hand-to-hand combat skills, which, by the way, are actually rather impressive, as we see him immediately walk through a line of enemy soldiers, taking each one out with a single hit, and the 4th one, who tried to apprehend him from behind, getting a back fist to the chin for his troubles. And admittedly, this is really surprising to me and probably anyone else who's only been reading from the beginning or watching from the beginning on these videos, to see Grunge be so capable in a fight. He's actually pretty impressed with himself and says, hey, just took them all down. How's your man doing? Unfortunately, he realizes now, after being shot 3 times in the chest, that he must have missed one. As Roxy screams in terror at seeing Grunge being shot, he goes to the ground immediately, and Roxy tells him to stay calm and breathe, and that there's certainly something that they can do to try and help him. But Grunge believes that it's too late, that he's going to die, and he tells Roxy to go on without him and get herself to safety, as he tells her that the pain is getting worse. But Roxy notices something very weird happening with Grunge's wounds as they start to glow and then close up. And then, out of nowhere, they just completely heal themselves, and at this point, Grunge spits the bullets out of his mouth. Grunge is shocked by this, as is everyone else around him, as he grabs one of the bullets and states, "Holy crap, like, these are the bullets that just got shot into me. They're even still warm, and I just spit them all right out." And Roxy's like, "Wow, that's super rad," which is maybe the weirdest reaction you could have, but she is also probably kind of shocked at going from, "I think my boyfriend's about to die," to, "Holy crap, he's totally healed in front of me." Meanwhile, back on the upper level, Timmy is anxiously sitting by the hole in the floor, hoping that his friends are okay. Unfortunately, he doesn't notice the enemy soldier sneaking up behind him, who puts a gun to the back of his head and tells him to freeze. At this point, Timmy screams out for help, as he's terrified by the soldier that he didn't know was there, and Jareb realizes exactly where Timmy is at and tells Pitt that they have to get to his aid immediately. Pitt wastes no time in jumping up through all the holes in the floor, multiple floors, to exactly where he originally fell through, and Timmy, of course, thinks this is super cool, as he just says awesome. However, the guard that was trying to capture Timmy has a completely opposite reaction, as he simply screams, "Oh my God," which is understandable given that he may not have realized exactly what it was that Lynch brought into the facility. And if he had not seen Pitt up until this point, and then suddenly saw him just jump up through a hole in the floor and realize that he's got a roughly 10-foot tall muscle biker monster to deal with, that seems like the most appropriate reaction. We then see an advertisement for the final chapter of Wildcats number 13. If you haven't seen any of my Wildcats videos, I'm not up to issue 13 quite yet, but I have made it through the original miniseries and issue number 0. You can check all of those episodes out in my Wildcats playlist. We then get a 2-page ad for what at this time was the upcoming new Wildstorm comic, Wetworks. If you'd like to know more about Wetworks, you can check out all my episodes on that series in my Wetworks playlist. The enemy soldier, still freaking out, just screams, "What the hell is that thing?" as Timmy responds, "Oh, that's my friend Pitt. You're in trouble now." And I love the fact that, like, Timmy is so confident in Pitt's abilities that he's just like, "Yeah, that's my buddy Pitt. He's cool. You're totally screwed though, bro." At this point, the soldier tries to use his hostage taking of Timmy to his advantage, as he shouts at Pitt to stay back or he's going to. However, Pitt immediately interrupts him by stating, "You're going to do absolutely nothing if you value your life." Jareb then tries to interject, stating that, this soldier doesn't actually pose any threat to them and that they need to allow him to retreat. At this point, Jareb actually contacts the soldier with his telepathic abilities, stating, "Just put the weapon down and leave and no harm will come to you." The soldier, however, does not understand exactly what that's all about, as he says, "Who just said that?" And Timmy explains, "Oh, that's Pitt's friend Jareb, and if I were you, I'd listen to what he's telling you to do." However, the soldier instead tells Timmy to shut up, and that if Pitt takes one step closer, he's going to, and Pitt says, "Do nothing," as he launches his attack and strikes the soldier with his claws, as we see the soldier fall and some blood flying off of Pitt's claws. Jareb then scolds Pitt once again, stating, "Come on, Pitt, was that necessary? That guy posed literally no threat to us." And Pitt responds by saying, "I know, that's why he's still alive." At this point, Timmy's just glad to see his friend, and he says, "Wow, Pitt, you're the best." And Pitt, realizing that Timmy's now once again reunited with him and that the imminent danger has been taken care of, just scoops Timmy up in his arm and says, "All right, well, now we got to get you to safety." But Timmy brings up the interesting point of they don't know exactly where they are or how to get out of this facility. And Jareb concurs, stating, "Yeah, this place is really kind of a labyrinth. It'll take us hours to figure our way out of here." And Pitt states, "Nah, leave that to me," as he literally just one punches his way through the nearest wall. A few more walls later, they finally reach the end of the facility and they realize that they are about 30 stories up in the air. And Timmy is right to point out that he's not exactly sure how they're going to get down, and that's a pretty long fall. And Jared once again agrees with Timmy, stating, yeah, maybe we should go back and find an elevator. But Pitt rebuttals by saying, you know what, I wasn't going that direction anyway, as he immediately super leaps out of the facility and goes even higher into the air. Timmy states, wow, super cool, but are we going to be okay? And Jared responds by stating, yeah, Pitt's got this under control, I hope. And Timmy then asks, wait a minute, what about our friends? Are we going to help them? And Pitt tells him not to worry about them. They're all pretty powerful and they should be just fine. Unfortunately, Pitt is kind of overestimating the gang's abilities, as they do have a lot of newfound powers, but they've never actually been in the heat of battle like this and had to work as a fully functioning team unit. Lynch, however, does realize this, and he understands that if he doesn't do anything to help them, that things are going to turn for the worst really quickly and that the kids are going to get overwhelmed. So at this point, he decides to use what he calls his ace up his sleeve. As he rolls up his sleeve, hits a button on some kind of sci-fi wristwatch thing, and calls in his Black Hammer unit, which are these heavily armored and weaponed biomech soldiers that we've never heard of before and are coming from literally nowhere. Like, seriously, where were these guys the entire time? It wasn't ever shown that they were anywhere around, and we have no idea how they just magically appeared where they needed to be. I mean, they're super cool, don't get me wrong. The designs are awesome. I love the way they look. But if we're going to have these guys kind of just at the moment's notice ready, well, explain exactly where they came from. But of course, the book never does. They were just here the whole time, never intervening during this entire firefight until Lynch calls them in, and now they're magically here, and we've never heard of them even once. The Black Hammers begin to immediately lay waste to Ivana's soldiers, and Caitlin starts to wonder who the heck are these guys when she's grabbed from behind by Lynch. Lynch tells her to stay down, but she screams, "Let go of me. I know you're with them. I'll take care of you." But Lynch cuts her off, stating, "No, I'm here to help. I know who you are, and I'm trying to get you out of here." Caitlin doesn't necessarily believe him right away, but Lynch reiterates, stating, "No, I was friends with your father." At this point, Caitlin is starting to trust Lynch a little bit as she states, "Wait a minute, how do you know him?" He says, it's kind of a long story and we'll get into it, but right now we need to get to safety. At this point, Caitlin finally agrees and starts to go with Lynch's plan. However, I would like to point out, this is what I was talking about earlier, where they don't keep the size of Fairchild consistent throughout the entire book. You can see here that she's roughly the same size as Lynch, even though she should be about a foot taller than him. And I don't know, this is just something that every artist kind of seems to have a little bit of a problem with in this case. I guess it's because Caitlin, despite being bigger than everyone else, still looks like just a regular human, so they can't kind of process the idea that they're supposed to be drawing her bigger, maybe? I don't know. I'm just guessing. We then see that the Black Hammers are still continuing to just completely empty their guns on all of the enemy soldiers. However, Lynch realizes that while they are incredibly powerful and more than a match for the soldiers that are here, that they're not going to last indefinitely, especially given the number of soldiers that the facility has, and that he only has 3 of these Black Hammer units. He tells them to cover them as they make their escape, as Lynch ushers all of the gang into a hallway and he closes the blast doors behind them, stating, "Keep running." The rest of the gang wonders if they can trust Lynch, and Caitlin says, right now, we kind of don't have a choice, as they all start to ask, who is this guy? He looks like one of the same government agents that imprisoned us. Should we really be trusting him? And finally, Caitlin gives in and states, they've got a good point, Lynch. Who are you? Why do you know who we are? And why exactly are you trying to help us? Lynch then goes on to explain that he was formerly the head of a super secret task force known as Team 7, and that the members of Team 7 were actually the fathers of all of the kids who are trying to escape the facility with him, and that They were supposed to be saving the world from the Cold War and protecting America's interest, and that everything was going great until the government decided that they wanted to turn the men of Team 7 into super soldiers, something like what the US government had with Youngblood. So they exposed them to the Gen Factor element, which made them Gen 12. However, this had some negative consequences. Some of the men were killed instantly, some of the men lost their minds and ended up killing themselves, but some of the men gained incredible powers. However, it wasn't necessarily for the best. Also, if you'd like to know more about the origins of Lynch and the other members of Team 7, which includes characters such as Deathblow and Grifter and Backlash, who are prominent throughout the entire Wildstorm universe, also Dane from Wetworks, you can check out my Team 7 playlist. Lynch then goes on to explain that many of the men involved in Team 7 decided that they had had enough and that they didn't want to be pawns and lab rats at the government's disposal, and instead decided to leave for a quiet life to raise their families in peace. However, it was discovered by the scientist at IO, that's International Operations, that any of the offspring of these men would also inherit the Gen Factor element and potentially develop their own superpowers. So they decided that they were going to hunt the men down and capture them and also bring their children back. However, many of the men of Team 7 were able to escape to a place called Sanctuary, where IO was unable to find them. However, a few were not, most notably the parents of Threshold and Bliss that we saw murdered in the first issue of this miniseries. At this point, Threshold and Bliss were taken captive by IO, brainwashed, and then trained and raised to be living superhero weapons that worked exclusively on behalf of the government, which is of course why they were aiding the government in capturing all of the other kids involved in the Gen 13 program and bringing them into the facility. Lynch then reaches a trash chute that he quickly opens and orders the kids to get into, stating that it will lead them to the outside of the facility. None of them really want to, as it's pretty disgusting and smells terrible, but it is their only option, so we see Roxy and Grunge starting to get in. At this point, Fairchild asks Lynch what exactly his plan is now that they're going to get out of here, and he doesn't seem to be following. Lynch responds by taking out his pistol, cocking it, and raising it to his side, stating, "I've got a score to settle with Ivana," as we come to the end of the issue, and we find out that this story is to be continued in issue number 5 of the Gen 13 miniseries. We then reach the Talk About My Generation letter section, which is where all of the readers got to write in and potentially have their letters published. Unfortunately, there's not a whole lot to talk about with this. All of these letters, well, not even most, all of these letters are just people saying, wow, your comic is great, we love everything about it, and all of the responses are just, thanks, we love making it, and basically telling people that it is going to become an ongoing series. But outside of that, there's nothing really of value that was written in any of this. It almost seems just like page filler. We also once again get a chance to look at J. Scott Campbell's rebuttal to what he believed was a slight from Wizard Magazine, kind of trashing the guys at Image, specifically the guys at Wildstorm, and he kind of took offense to the whole thing, maybe a little bit too much offense, as it seemed like they were more so trying to make jokes than, literally call out the people who worked at Image. But that's not the way that J. Scott Campbell saw it, so he made this rebuttal, and it's not even really that big of a deal, but I just thought I'd point it out. We then get a 2-page ad for Gen 13 number 0. As I stated earlier, I have already made a video about Gen 13 number 0. However, if you have not watched it, don't watch it until I finish my mini-series retrospective on the original Gen 13 mini-series, issues 1 through 5, and then watch Gen 13 number 0, because chronologically, that's the way it was supposed to be. However, I didn't realize that. I thought the whole thing started with 0, so I made a video on that first. The entire thing was a mistake on my part, but come on, why would you release issues 1 through 5, then 0, and then 6? That doesn't make sense, but that's what they wanted to do, so they confused me in the future and probably some other people in the past, but, whatever, that's how they wanted to do it, that's how they did it. On the final page of the book, we actually get a cool little mail away where you could potentially get a Gen 13 number 0 ash can, which would have been really cool. I would love to have this, and if I ever find one somewhere, I will not hesitate to buy it. I have a few of the Image ash cans, which I might make like a short on or something at some point, but they were kind of like cool little promotional things, and anytime I see one that I don't have, I'm always quick to snap it right up. They're usually not terribly expensive. I mean, some of them can be like $10 or whatever, but I don't feel like that's that bad. And I would love to get my hands on this one along with some of the other ones that I'm missing. And on the reverse inside cover, we get an advertisement for Wildstorm, that is, set number 1 trading cards, which shockingly enough were produced by Wildstorm themselves and not one of the card producers like Topps or Flair, which I'm really kind of shocked that Jim Lee was like, no, we're going to make our own trading cards. That was, kind of a big step for them to try and get themselves into that market by producing the cards themselves, especially when you consider how much more vast the distribution network would have been for Flair and Topps back in the mid-90s. And that was Gen 13 number 4. Overall, I thought it was a pretty decent book. The artwork is great. Why wouldn't it be? It's J. Scott Campbell. He's a fantastic artist. Again, a little disappointed that roughly half the panels don't have a background. That's always a pet peeve of mine. But I felt like the story was really coherent. Pitt immediately making his exit after serving the purpose of basically giving scaling to Fairchild's abilities in issue number 3, which, let's face it, that's why he was involved in this, because they needed a way to explain exactly how powerful Fairchild was, and having her go toe-to-toe with Pitt was the easiest way to do it. But as a whole, I feel like this story did a good job of giving us a look into exactly how the storyline worked, coming from the original Team 7 all the way up into the mid-90s, where we now have the children of Team 7 becoming Gen Active themselves. And it also shows us what exactly led Lynch to finally decide that he was going to leave IO and strike out with the kids and give up, what he had been working his entire adult life for, with where he existed in his position in the government and in trying to work for American interest and whatnot, and finally just stating, I can't be part of this anymore. Again, my big complaint being that whole thing with the Black Hammer biomech soldier guys. Like, again, they're super cool, but where in the hell did they possibly come from? I always find it weird when they try to just insert these guys as a way to get out of said situation, when there's no explanation for these guys, quote unquote, ever having been there in the first place. But then again, these are all just my opinions. Your opinions may be completely different. You may hate this book. You may think that there was nothing wrong with the way they introduced the Black Hammers. And if that's okay, or if that's the case, it's okay, because everyone's entitled to their own opinions. If you enjoyed today's video, please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. And thanks for stopping by. Have a great day.